Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The movie podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. This week, we got 3 brand new movies to review. This week is full of movies that will make you love, laugh, cry, and cover your eyes. Just not for being scary. This week on the show, 2 best friends, one raising a family and the other about to start a family after a one-night stand. These friends must navigate not only life, but their friendship in Babes. Nature is unforgiving in the new horror film, A Violent Nature. And finally, a comedian dad must co-parent to help raise their autistic son, but when faced with a crucial decision about his son's future, they will go on a father-son road trip that will change their lives forever in Ezra. We've got a lot to cover this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows, what? A roar and a bursting of flame. The Movie Wire podcast. Just need people like me. The Wire. And here we go.
Lifelong friends Eden and Dawn, one single and wanting a baby, the other already a mother. They navigate challenges to their bond when Eden pursues pregnancy alone after a one-night stand in the new comedy, Babes.
Are you good, dude?
I need you to check my shit.
Oh my God, you're in labor. I don't know the medical term for this, but your vagina looks like it's yawning. Like.
Wait, hold up.
Hey, I got you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Today I saw a baby be born.
I am so proud of you.
Don't touch me!
Okay.
Oh my hand!
I'm Eden.
Clyde.
Dawn, crisis. I've had sex,
But I was on my period. So you can't get pregnant on your period.
Girl.
Girl, stop.
Girl, you stop. We went to the same school. We learned the same shit.
Hey, how are ya? Am I pregnant?
Yeah. Single mom, she may not keep the baby choice.
Oh, right.
Single.
You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. I have your back no matter what.
You think I can do this, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does the fetus look healthy? Because I didn't know I was pregnant. I've had weed, shrooms, alcohol, coffee, and unpasteurized cheese.
You did not tell me how sexy it is to be pregnant. Were you crazy horny?
Hey. You said you were gonna be at all the appointments?
I have a family. I've been swamped.
Best friends get so screwed over in adulthood. You and me, we're family.
Bitch.
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 I'm scared of the decision I made.
But it just feels like destiny, and this is Destiny's child.
Amnio time. You ready? It's a pretty big needle.
Oh, what? That's for my...
Yeah?
Cool. No, cool.
Okay. You ready?
Now, it would be so easy for a movie like Babes to go under the radar. On the surface, from watching the trailer, some might think this is made for a specific audience. And given I attended a screening on opening weekend to a completely empty theater, I have feelings this is going to be one of those movies that just go under the radar. A comedy about pregnancy, being a mom, and the stresses of it all. And that would be a shame that this movie would be shut out by the mere basis of the marketing. But if I had to be perfectly fair and open and honest, would I have seen this movie in the theater after watching the trailer if I didn't have to review it? Honestly, probably not. That is one of the special things I love about doing this show, is because of films like this that just take me by surprise. From the first 15 minutes or so, I noticed right away that the movie had some sharp dialogue, but it wasn't until the first scene of childbirth where we have our character Dawn, played by Michelle Patu, giving birth in the hospital to her second child, where she states that she really needed to shit. When the baby makes an appearance, she yells out, "Did I shit on my baby?" When best friend Eden, played by Yana Glazer, responds with, "No, your baby's on your shit." This is the point where I lifted my head from it resting on my hand to give out a big belly laugh to in a completely empty theater. The comedy timing from Glazer and Patu was absolutely spot on. Now, Yana Glazer and Michelle Patu, this is one of their first starring roles, and we can really tell that director Pamela Adlon really just says action and allows these two fine comedians to work the room. There's a chemistry here that reminds me of Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, where some of their funniest moments in film is just their mere conversation. Glazer and Patu are so in sync with their individual styles of comedy, their styles just shine in mere conversation. But besides the spot on chemistry and good performances from Glazer and Patu, the writing here. The writing is extremely clever, it's sharp, it's fresh. Our writers here, Josh Robinowitz and also our star Yana Glazer, focus on not necessarily what's happening on screen, but a focus on the buildup. Some might find this movie a slow burn if you're looking for a situational comedy. That's not this. There's acting and then there's performing, and our writers spend most of the time with this dialogue, ensuring that our cast acts, just not performs. There is a proper balance to the acting and the performances here. We do have a lot of funny situational moments, but it's just the added cherry on top of the crescendo of the buildup from the smart and clever writing. There is a moment in the middle of the film that I can pinpoint where this movie was successful in its build and its work to win me over with a likable duo of characters. It's when we have Shania Twain's classic song, "I Feel Like a Woman," comes on, and our two comedians are pulling a brutal office space attack on an industrial-looking breast pump. Now, can I relate to the frustrations and stresses of breastfeeding or breast pumps to the point of destroying them? No. But I had a smile on my face from ear to ear watching this scene, even to a point I couldn't help but talk back to the screen in an empty theater saying, "You go, girl." Admittedly, this was the part where I was glad the theater was empty. This is also the moment I also knew that this was a movie that was 100% marketed towards a specific audience, and given the material, I can see why, but at the same time, it's a movie that will also make any viewer chuckle at one point and also appreciate the stresses and pain of what mothers have to endure to bring a life into this world. And what the filmmakers do with this material is that it makes it self-aware of this and has some fun with what happens in between, but also addresses bigger topics of balancing friendships after childbirth, which is a brilliant change to some movies that we see, where we see adults at dinner parties, movies, social events, with the kids easily being watched with a babysitter, they're at school, they're at daycare, whatever it may be. But what Babes does is show the stresses of trying to go out. It shows the stresses of finding people to watch our kids, trying to get a sitter, and this is where the brilliant writing feels fresh. It also shows what happens when something goes wrong in the household, something breaks or a babysitter calls out, and how it can throw a family into complete and utter chaos. These are all the in-between situations that may not all be funny, and rightfully so. Some of these situations shouldn't be funny. But for some of us that have kids, there's some situations in here that we can relate to. When something goes wrong in the household, I think all of us have said, what's next? What's gonna happen next? So there is a relatability here for those that have kids, not just mothers. But I think the key point is showing the appreciation of the mother figure and what they go through. But there are some chuckles of relatability that many viewers will take away from. Babes plays like a current telling of 1990s parenthood, but between two friends, with writing that almost feels like an edgy, contemporary Woody Allen, with an exclamation mark on edgy, but honest. Not only that, but it's completely full of heart that we feel when the credits roll. This is a completely ambitious film that after watching, it's hard to picture anybody else play our Eden and Dawn characters. There are so many layers to these characters that it would be so easy to overcomplicate them, especially our Eden character, who has suffered from loss in multiple forms in her life. And when she gets the opportunity to bring life into this world, it's a subtle glee that we have to look for at Eden, but it's there and it perfectly matches her character without holding the viewer's hand. As we come to understand through the first act who Eden is through conversation, it feels like eavesdropping into her life, and we gradually learn more and more with each situation she faces. Some funny, some heartbreaking, but the movie is written so well, the characters are written brilliantly. There is never a moment in this movie where we take our characters, let's take Eden, that I didn't root for her happiness, that I didn't root for her with a positive outcome, that I didn't root for these two best friends' relationships. This is a comedy of life, love, and loss, and portrays the message that no matter the chaos, stress, sadness, life is a gift and life can't live without the feeling of the want and the love. And our director, Pamela Adlon, ensures this message is subtle but present and never steers off course. Babes realistically is not going to be for everybody, as most movies can be said. But Babes is not only brilliantly written, it takes a lot of risk. It challenges the viewer to look beyond the comedic surface to the heartfelt messaging, and it's sure to crack a smile at some point to even the most judgmental filmgoers. I'm giving Babes 3.5 stars.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
When his family is murdered, a deaf boy is trained by a mysterious shaman to become an instrument of death in Boy Kills World. That was so crazy that it worked, receiving 3 stars. Welcome to the front lines when empires fall in Civil War. That seemed like the wrong movie at the wrong time, but added nothing more than the things we see on the news during election time, receiving 2 stars. Create Something to Fear in The First Omen, which was haunting to think on how it took me by surprise on the amount of care that went into creating such a haunting experience on an exhausted franchise, receiving 3.5 stars. A down-and-out stuntman must find the missing star of his ex-girlfriend's blockbuster film in Fall Guy. That barely fell below a recommendation, receiving 2.5 stars. Rise Together or Fall Alone in Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, which was a complete popcorn flick and played like a fireworks show, receiving 2.5 stars. Your biggest fears just got bigger in the horror movie Sting, which started with the sting, then just got caught in its own web of overconfidence and writer's block, receiving 2 stars. The Ghostbusters are back, facing a chilling threat in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire that put a freeze on all the charm, receiving 2 stars. Children can be such monsters in a wildly entertaining and fresh take on a vampire film that involves a vampire in a tutu in Abigail, that received 3.5 stars. And finally, election season is a bloodbath, and change is here from a horror movie I forgot even got released to theaters that won't be getting my vote in Founders Day, that received 1.5 stars. You can check out those reviews of my previous episodes, and while you do, don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Now, before I get into the last set of reviews, there is a podcast that is part of my weekly listening routine. And soon on the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast Father's Day special, you can hear this amazing man talk about his favorite movie dad. I'm talking about my favorite Wilson family over at the Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. It's an absolutely amazing show. Make sure to check them out, and don't forget to follow, subscribe, and review their show. The link to that show will be in the description of this episode. But let's hear from the Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast now.
The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. You know that family whose house you hung out in when you were a kid? The house was a little loud and chaotic, but always fun, and sometimes felt more home than home. Well, that's us.
We're the Wilsons, and we welcome you into our podcast with silly chat, ridiculous games, and interviews with interesting people.
Like a spin doctor. The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast.
Welcome home.
Bobby Cannavale plays comedian Max, who co-parents autistic son Ezra, played by newcomer William A. Fitzgerald, with ex-wife Jenna, played by Rose Byrne. When faced with a crucial decision about Ezra's future, Max and Ezra go on a life-changing cross-country road trip in Ezra.
My man Ezra, flying without a net so that he could order himself a...
iced tea, please.
The doctor who first told me my son was autistic could have saved us both a lot of time if he just said the truth. Autistic kids don't give a... You want me to put him in a special needs school? Jenna knows I'm broke.
She knows you're still not over her. The man your age shouldn't be living with his father.
He led 20 kids onto Washington Street.
Your son has been a danger to himself.
He's not dangerous. He's a challenge. Nobody wants to do the work.
Now I see where the dangerous behavior comes from.
Son of a...
You want to do something for your son? You get yourself to L.A. Jimmy Kimmel wants to book you.
What?
They're not going to fly you. Is that going to be a problem?
No.
Hey, what are you doing?
Ezra, get in the car. I need to get him away from here.
I'm taking the car. I'm taking him aside, Pop.
All I ever wanted was just to protect our boy.
Well, I'm protecting him now.
Give your Uncle Nicky a hug, huh? Come here.
Hey, where you going, Ken?
You know, the word autism comes from the Greek, in your own world. I don't want him in his own world. I want him in this world. That kid is the one thing that I can't get wrong.
Just look him in the eye. Looking a horse in the eye is like sharing your soul.
Where the hell are you?
Taking a little time off with Ez.
It's not a good time to take off, Max.
You're fighting for something. You might have to suffer consequences, but it's worth it because you did it. Because you love your kid.
A dad's job is to take his son down the field. And if he gets tackled, all that dad wants is for that kid to pick up the ball and to take it the rest of the way.
Now, here is my problems with films that try and tackle the topic of autism, disabilities, or special needs, especially when films use children as its emotional vehicle. The problem is that the filmmakers are so focused on getting an emotional reaction from the audience, there is almost a level of underlying disrespect to the topic of disability, autism, or special needs, where movies put emotion over realism, and they don't really add any substance to open up a conversation. What we've seen from movies in the past, they tend to just kind of dumb down the topic of autism, disabilities, or special needs, where our main autistic character just seems like a prop, and just as I said before, a vehicle to try and get the audience to cry. And even with some of these films, we get a talent that isn't even autistic, but rather an actor that has to decide on what vast spectrum of autism they're going to portray to the character. Then comes along this movie. Ezra is different in many aspects, but does it try and do what so many Hollywood movies before try and do, which is get the audience to cry? Absolutely. Is it successful? Absolutely. Does it follow the same cliches that we have seen from films like this in the past? Absolutely. But what makes Ezra different is the mere fact it embraces the challenge of raising a child with autism without overextending the challenges and balancing that with the mere love of a child, but also acknowledging our parents, Jenna and Max, who aren't perfect. And the movie never shies away from showing our parents' flaws. And even on the surface level, at times, Ezra can feel a little over-exaggerated. But I can see what our writer, Tony Sparadakis, is trying to do, which is give examples of frustration in the form of actions versus drawing out dialogue, to give the target audience what they want with the entertainment factor, but also showing an example of how frustrating being a parent running into legal roadblocks can be, especially with the medical system, the school system. There's a lot of frustrations outside of the household that's out of parents' control. At times, these moments from hitting a doctor, running from the police, yelling lines can seem overdone. But given the hour and 40-minute runtime, there is a lot to solve emotionally for our writer Sparadakis and our director Tony Goldwyn to get us through, to ensure us as viewers we're not just only thinking, but reacting to what's on screen. Sparadakis was smart to give us more of the point of view of our father Max, who is never really likable or dislikable, but we do question his intent throughout the movie, where he's a stand-up comedian who gets a break to be on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. And this opportunity will be the question mark on Max's intent throughout the movie. Max has his own internal conflicts aspects of growing up with a less than perfect childhood, where we see numerous examples of this as he speaks to his father, played by Robert De Niro, of who he lives with. Max also has the internal struggle of dealing with a failed marriage. The only thing Max feels he has control of is his comedy routine. That seems to be the only thing that can output his feelings, and he is desperately holding on to it to feel like he has control of something. Now, throughout the movie, we get samples and we get to watch some of Max's comedy routine. And on the surface, it's an interesting premise, but it just doesn't work. It's not believable because the writing isn't funny, and Bobby Cannavale's blunt delivery just isn't likable. We get these cutscenes of Max stand-up that usually is just him telling a story while we pan the camera to the audience laughing. But I'm still not sure what they're laughing at because these scenes are not funny. The comedy routine is not funny. And I get it, these scenes are important to move the story along. It just really pulls the movie back and loses a little bit of credibility in the storytelling aspect. If we're going to portray Max as a stand-up comedian, the least the writing can do is actually make him funny. But whenever we get Ezra on screen again, played by the absolutely amazing William A. Fitzgerald in his first, but hopefully not his last on-screen debut, we forget all about these comedy scenes that really just don't work. Ezra plays as a symbol of redemption to our father character, and not only that, but actually the movie itself. What Ezra as a movie and a character does is do the opposite of what we've seen in the past, which keeps the character one-dimensional and linear. Now, in films past, when we have an autistic character or a special needs character, we have this character, like I said before, treated like a prop, where we see previous portrayals speak out only when it comes time for a conflict or forced emotional element. Ezra here is treated as an actual human being, not a prop. We see demonstrations of heart, intelligence, personality, and character growth, the way a character like this should be treated in a film. The filmmakers here don't expect Ezra to grow drastically. We see it more realistically. We do see growth, but we do more so with the discovery of our adult characters, as they don't necessarily grow, but self-realize and discover their own demons and flaws. Our characters grow together in unison in a perfect balance. Now, as we get towards the second act, we get a road trip chase to find Ezra and Max. I was reminded of the 1989 film The Wizard, starring Fred Savage and Luke Edwards, that came out in the Nintendo hype of the 80s, where we saw mute Luke Edwards travel cross-country to LA to play in a Nintendo championship. Now, I'm not going to say I dislike The Wizard, because as a kid, I loved that movie. But at the same time, the Nintendo theme and the fantasy of kids on the run was what really drove this movie to likability. Not the drama, not the disability of our Luke Edwards character, Jimmy. This is a prime example of using disability in a character as a mere prop, with everything else around it to really amplify the likability. But as an adult watching The Wizard, one thing I noticed is that all the supporting characters in The Wizard all seem to have internal conflicts, but the film never really takes its time to address it, but merely just brings it up as window dressings. This is where Ezra shines. Ezra handles this topic in a balanced but also a very deep way to really dig at the soul without using over-explained dialogue. It seeks out to do justice to internal conflicts, not of a child with autism, but rather the parents and family that have to come to terms with their past and current conflicts to learn from it and be better, not for a child with autism, but for a child, period. The film challenges the audience to look at what it means to be a parent with past and current trauma, to kind of step up to recognize flaws in their own parenting, but also the good things that they're doing, and never treating our Ezra character as an actual conflict, because at times he's more intelligent than the parents we see on screen, because our parents show a lifetime of self-blame, lack of confidence, and the tricky things for all parents to do is balance doing what's right for our children and accomplishing our wants and desires while still having a child. Because the movie does what a lot of these movies of the past haven't done, which is address all these side issues, a lot of these internal thoughts, these internal conflicts. And it sends a brilliant and beautiful message that we all can take away. That once we have a child, especially one as special as Ezra, at the end of the day, it's not how we accomplish our dreams, but how we can ensure that our children live theirs. Ezra by far isn't a perfect film, but when it comes to the balance of messaging and trying to attempt to fit into the inspirational emotional film category to give viewers that warm feeling walking out, given its runtime, it teeters more on the entertainment entertainment level than the substance level, and could have really used an additional 20-30 minutes to really take this movie to the next level. But at the same time, Ezra did what it sought out to do: open up conversation and ensures that the audience cries. Some are sad tears, but leaving the theater, our filmmakers ensure you leave with those happy tears to make sure you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. And they do it by putting in the work to earn it. And they do it by addressing not just the autism topic, but what surrounds the autism topic. There is no doubt that Ezra will be the new cinematic soul food for the eyes this year that will make you sigh with satisfaction by the time the credits roll. I'm giving Ezra 3 stars. When a locket is removed from a collapsed fire tower in the woods that entombs the rotting corpse of Johnny, a vengeful spirit spurred by horrific 60-year-old crime, his body is resurrected and becomes hellbent on retrieving this locket in the new vision of the slasher genre in a violent nature.
Originally, I came up with the concept of the film itself, of like treating shooting a slasher from the slasher's point of view. And then knowing that I wanted to set it in Northern Ontario's where I grew up, so a lot of just great woods and landscape to explore there. And from that, knowing all these elements, that's what I kind of built the legend out from. It's really inspired by Gus Van Zant's work in the 2000s with Jerry and Elephant and Last Days, and how he let the characters tell the story at their own pace and just follow them through environments. I was just really struck by that. A horror kid, I was just wondering, like, how do we make that, can we carry that tone into a horror film? And from there, I was just going through different like genres and subgenres and realizing that like the slasher is probably the perfect fit for it. It's, slashers usually take place in their own like very specific, unique environment. Especially like a supernatural slasher, like, falling into more like the Cropsey or the Jasons or anything like that, where we can don't need to hear them speaking. We can just kind of follow them. If you're like taking the movie for what it is and not for like what you want it to be, I think people seem to like just settle right into it, and it's. But I know that it's gonna be there's gonna be some division once it gets released. You have to be aware of like what you're putting an audience through and what an audience's level of patience is going to be and how much you can try that. But at the same time, just thinking about weighing that with what's the film that I want to make.
Written and directed by Chris Nash, who did segment letter Z in the ABCs of Death 2 in A Zygote. And this is his first major theatrical release produced by Shudder. Now, let me just get this out of the way. I just want to just say this up front. I applaud Shudder for giving more opportunities to small independent filmmakers and giving them a shot onto the big screen. Over the last couple of years, I've been a fan of a couple of their theatrical releases, including Mad God and one of my favorites that made it to my top 10 list last year, which was When Evil Lurks. I will also applaud their attempt at not just releasing generic horror films off the assembly line, but rather experimental projects to help revitalize the horror genre and the horror audience. Even though my first real rant on this show came from one of Shudder's original theatrical projects of Skinamarink, which in retrospect and reflection, was I too hard on? Absolutely not. Writer-director Kyle Edward Ball from Skinamarink still stinks of overconfidence in his vision with an absolutely flawed execution on an interesting premise. And you know what? I'll even go on the record and say, even if I was judging an independent film school festival, would I have hated this film just the same? Abso-fucking-lutely. And as we're talking about flawed execution on an interesting premise, it has been a couple years since Skinamarink came out, and I have to say there hasn't been a movie that Shudder has released to really make me feel as annoyed and as frustrated as Skinamarink. That is until A Violent Nature. A Violent Nature takes us through the point of view of a slasher killer that feels like an extended cut of the original Friday the 13th, coming from our killer's point of view. It's an interesting premise, one that I was excited to witness. It's out in the woods in seclusion. We see our killer sneak up on victims, walk underwater, give a couple 80s style kills that even look like they're out of the 80s because the movie is still low budget. And to an extent, I actually think that the strategy that they're kind of going for is actually pretty smart, to work with a tone from the 80s with a budget that suits them. In theory, this should work, but as we get into the story, if you really want to call it a story, I started to feel something familiar, but I couldn't validate it until we get to an early scene where we have a handful of teenagers sitting around a campfire telling a chilling story. The camera pans in a circular motion non-stop around our characters as they speak, and it was hard to focus on any of the characters because the camera is acting like a drunken TikToker. The film's drunken camera work tries desperately to mask its shortcomings. Unfortunately, it only highlights the gaping chasm between ambition and execution. The aesthetics clash violently with the extremely forced overacting, leaving the viewer cringing at every wooden line delivery. And I don't know if it was just my theater, but the actual dialogue volume was extremely low. It was extremely hard to grasp what the cast was saying. Or maybe it was just a row of 4 teenagers blowing vape smoke up in the air right in front of me that acted as a distraction. And Jesus Christ, just a side note, people do that shit at home, not in a public place where an attempt at entertainment on a big screen is present, even if the movie is absolutely atrocious. But with all that aside, between the constant camera movement and the low volume on the dialogue, we then go to our killer's movements. As we follow this killer, we are met with an overview from behind of him walking. Between his slow movements and the camera view, I realize this premise is original and interesting, but the execution by our writer-director Chris Nash isn't new. All he did was take the idea from a third-person point of view video game for our killer and use a style of video game cutscenes for the filler to create his vision. And this doesn't work here. It's like watching somebody else play a third-person video game who's having all the fun, but you're just stuck with the cutscenes. Nash obviously has a fascination with how video games are shot and wanted to translate that to the big screen. And don't get me wrong, I've played numerous video games where I thought they would have made great movies. But whatever this is, it's slow, it's boring, and I would have rather watched a 2-year-old play a story-based video game than this. The camera movements here separate the viewer away from the story instead of bringing us in. I'm sure this isn't Nash's intent, but in his head, I'm sure it sounded pretty damn cool. The problem we have with the style of the shots and shooting selected by Nash is he coasts on the mere premise of what the killer's point of view is, but has no plan of execution on how to make it interesting or engulfing. So what we are left with, we just have these over-the-shoulder or aerial shots of our killer walking oh so slow from kill to kill, to the point I wanted to shout to the screen, "Go faster!" There are a couple things Nash could have considered. Pick a different type of killer, serial killer, creature, or speed up the killer. Maybe even give us a point of view or perspective like we saw from 2015's Hardcore Henry, that really leaned on the first-person video game feel. At least that had some level of uniqueness and excitement that encouraged viewers to follow along with the consistent style of shooting. But when it comes to In a Violent Nature, here all we get is boring, slow-moving characters and camera movements that are more of a distraction than an addition. And you know what? I guess Nash might have thought that was okay, because I'm sure Nash wanted to distract our viewers from the weak story or lack thereof, and the completely careless characters that are inserted. The main missing element to a movie that is trying to stand apart as something new and fresh surrounding the slasher genre is, of course, the killings. The killings here, with the exception of maybe one, are complete and utter yawn. This again is where we have a lack of vision of how this concept was going to be executed. A movie like this should have fun with itself, but instead just follows a slow-moving guy in the woods. Last year I watched an older documentary about a guy that decided to live by himself out in the middle of Alaska with no electricity, no plumbing, and had to live off the land for over 20 years. Following this man for over 2 hours was more entertaining and interesting than following the point of view of a mass killer, because there's absolutely nothing interesting that happens. Nash may have been wise to study some of these documentaries like this to gain a sense of how to make a feature that follows a singular subject. In A Violent Nature, we'll be getting a head nod for his ambitious idea, but a shaking of my head on the execution. It has moments of cool factor, but our writer Chris Nash asks the viewer for their utmost patience while we visually see him try and work out how this concept is going to work. but in the end, it never plays out. Nash doesn't prove to have an eye for building suspense, and it's clear he didn't have a vision of how to execute on his idea to translate to the screen. The ending result was a complete bore from start to finish. We get an ending that is completely lazy and made the runtime even more frustrating. In A Violent Nature is a forgettable entry into the horror slasher genre. Its attempt to subvert the slasher tropes fall flat, leaving us with a film that's neither scary nor interesting nor engaging. Save your time and skip this one. It's destined for the bargain bin of forgotten DVDs. I'm giving In Violent Nature 1.5 stars. But it's still better than Skidamarink. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you haven't yet checked out the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and the Movie Wire's crossover show, Back to the Balcony, make sure you do. Again, the link of that show will be in the description of this episode. Until next week, do me a favor. Make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.